What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 117, and I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, I'm breaking down Biden's Pentagon budget proposal for the year 2022. It's going to be $715 billion of our taxpayer money largely shoveled at the military industrial complex for more failing weapon systems like the F 35. So I'm breaking down how the government is wasting a massive pile of our money on today's show. Be sure to share it. You can find the show at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for a full archive of this show, foreign policy focus, and the daily news roundup that I write. Also, I've written a couple original articles that you could also find in that archive. You can find the show on any of the social media accounts, Facebook, MeWe, or Twitter. The Twitter handle is at con_interest. You can find the video version of the show on Odyssey or YouTube. We recently were censored by YouTube. They took down episode 115, where I interviewed Keith Knight on Blue Anon. So now if you want to listen or watch that, I guess, you could really only find that at Odyssey. So I recommend subscribing to that channel, especially if you like watching the YouTube version of the show, the video version of the show, because YouTube says the next time I say something they don't like, they're not going to allow me to post the show for a week. And it also seems like it may be a matter of time before the YouTube channel just gets deleted entirely. I am going to write an appeal because I've asked several people, they've listened to the show, that, say there's nothing in there that YouTube claims is in there. But I expect that this is going to now be an ongoing problem that I have. It seems like a lot of content creators run into it once they start getting flagged. It's just a matter of time before they get rid of you. So check out Odyssey. The link to that channel is in the show notes page. You can support the show financially. We take donations at Patreon and Subscribestar. There are also addresses to crypto wallets in the show notes page. You can support the show and get yourself some great CBD products at plomaverdecbd.com. Again, the URL is plomaverdecbd.com. And then when you check out, you use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, and you get 25% off when you spend $75 or more. Now, the reason you should get your CBD from Paloma Verde is they have high quality CBD products and a wide variety of products. Not everybody likes gummies or soft gels, tinctures. Some people, I really prefer their topicals, even though all their I really like their soft gels as well, but their topicals are absolutely fantastic. They work really quickly to relieve pain, and so I've been using the sports cream quite a bit recently, and just rub it on whenever I'm feeling some pain, and pretty instant relief. And you don't have the icy hot of some of the other products or the strong smell of Bengay. So really recommend all the products they have over there at plomaverdecbd.com. Use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, to save yourself 25% off. Now let's get into the show. All right, so Biden's budget for the Pentagon for 2022 is $715 billion. Now, we should start by mentioning that 715 billion is not the entirety of the US defense budget. This is the mainline budget for the Pentagon for what their operations are. There's also the Department of Energy, which maintains the US nuclear weapons, and with that budget, which is also weapons, it's $753 billion. But even that doesn't include all of America's national defense. It doesn't include the VA. It doesn't include the interest on the debt from the previous wars, like the Iraq War. It doesn't include the Department of Homeland Security. It doesn't include the U.S. intelligence agencies. So there's a lot within this that's not included. So when you hear people saying that the U.S. is spending $1 trillion a year on war, that is true, but today I just want to go through and pick apart this particular $715 billion. Now, the fiscal year for the U.S. doesn't, or actually starts in October, and so it'll be October 1st of 2021 that this budget would go into effect. And again, it has to be approved by Congress, and so it could end up that they spend a little bit more, and we'll talk about that later on. Now, I got several articles to break this down, and almost every year on the show, if you go back to the foreign policy focus shows, you could hear me doing some kind of budget breakdown on the show. And one of the challenges of doing budget breakdowns is that people interpret the budget in different ways. And so sometimes they'll report things as lump sums, like, 80 F-35s the Pentagon's buying this year, but other times they'll say the Navy is buying like 14. I don't know what the number is this year, but the Navy is buying 14. And so sometimes the numbers get confusing and overlap a little bit, but I am going to try to like get really into the weeds and talk about how much money we're spending on the different weapon systems. But this is a $715 billion budget with a lot of projects with different and confusing names. So honestly, it is hard to get everything in here right and to make sure you really understand what's happening in this budget. And I'm sure the congressmen don't do any better than I do when they pass this thing. Now, I'm going to start off with a CNBC article that does a kind of a broad overlook, but then I'm going to get into some other articles that have a little bit more drilled down and specific like line item issues as well. Now they say that the national the budget, the $753 billion, is a 2% increase. I think the $715 billion baseline Pentagon budget is a slight increase, about $10 billion over the previous budget. The Republicans in Congress are really upset that the budget didn't clock in at more. The CNBC article has this like stupid picture of a plane with like fire behind it, and it looks like a scene from an action movie, which is man, it's so unfair because they're promoting these weapons. This is like an ad for all the cool stuff we're buying this year because you have a picture like this, and it's propaganda. It's propaganda, but they do a decent job of breaking down some of the things in this budget. Now, another thing to note of the budget in general is that it cuts the OCO, which for years has been known as a Pentagon slush fund, the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund, and I think it's clocked in at scores of billions of dollars. I would say like 50 to 60 billion dollars every year. And this was enacted in 2021 to help Congress get around the sequester that they set for themselves. They made the point that we're not going to continue to spend absurd amounts of money and increase all of our budgets, and so they put this plan in place that was going to prevent that. But then they just came up with like legal mechanisms around it and continued to increase the defense budget and everything. So the sequester really didn't do anything, but there's no more need for the OCO, which gets a lot of negative intention because of because of how much it's just a slush fund and it's impossible to track where the money is going. And so there may be a little bit more transparency taking the OCO out of it. But again, this is $715 billion. The Pentagon never passes an audit. And so it's very possible that money is getting misallocated or is going to like BLAP funds and stuff like that. We're just doing the absolute best we can to try to identify where our taxpayer dollars is going. Now, this was announced on the Friday before Memorial Day weekend, and so it didn't get a whole lot of attention. But when it was announced, Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hitz told reporters the department in this budget takes a clear-eyed approach to Beijing and provides investments to prioritize China as our pacing challenge. And so I think this is one of the most important things that we get out of the budget, is that it is targeting China and naming China as the number one U.S. competitor. Now, that doesn't completely leave out Russia, Iran, North Korea, and other non-state and transnational issues that had said were also included. But again, Russia gets lumped in with the Iran and North Korea as non-state actors, where China is set aside as our main, what they call pacing challenge, but really means the main country that the U.S. is going to confront. The Pentagon is asking for $5.1 billion for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. This is a massive amount of money that started getting spent last year. That's to increase American weapon capabilities and the ability to occupy islands and reefs in the South China Sea, should we want to do that to confront China. And so my guess is that this is going to be a growing portion of the budget over the coming years is 5.1 billion this year, but as the US adds new weapons capabilities in the region, like new missiles, I'm sure China is going to work on new missile interceptors, and then the US is going to say, well, we need hypersonic missiles and more cruise missiles to bypass the Chinese missile interceptors, and we're going to need new ships or other technologies or missile interceptors of our own. And so I do think this Pacific Deterrence Initiative is going to really grow over the years, but it's 5.1 billion for 2022. There's also $500 million in this budget for COVID-19 and pandemic preparedness is what they're calling it. I'm not sure what that's actually going to do. And then 617 million to address and prepare for climate change. Now, the most ironic thing about this is we're spending billions of dollars here on F-35s and all these other planes and some of the military vehicles that are massive polluters. The Pentagon's one of the, if not largest polluters on the planet. And, this is a $715 billion budget, right? And only this 617 million is going to quote unquote climate change, to prepare and adapt to climate change. And this is being signaled on the left as some kind of victory in Biden's progressive policy, but look at all this pollution that they're doing. And nuclear weapons are again one of the worst things that you could possibly have for the climate and the environment, especially if they start going off. Not much less testing them. And so if you really want to address climate solutions, you would think maybe start with trying to eliminate nuclear weapons. You could also talk about flying less operations and stuff like that to reduce the emissions of all of our planes that again are massive polluters. So that's just some more hypocrisy here. Now, in this CNBC article, they say the Pentagon is asking for $52.4 billion in total aircraft. So this doesn't mean just the Air Force. This is total aircraft, which the Navy has some, the Army has some, and the Marines as well. But in total, they're going to buy 85 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters for $12 billion. This is Lockheed Martin's big pet project. It's the world's most expensive weapons system, and it's just disturbing that we continue to shovel our taxpayer money at Lockheed for this particular project for several reasons. One, it's such a failure that we're also going to spend $1.5 billion on 12 Boeing F-15 EX fighter jets, so upgraded versions of the F-15, because the F-35, which was supposed to replace like the entirety of America's air fleet, right, it was supposed to be able to do like the bombing missions. It was supposed to be able to engage in dogfights. It was supposed to be able to launch air to surface missiles and also provide close air support for troops, and it really can't do any of that. And so now we have to buy other planes like these Boeing F-15s to replace the F-35 or to compensate for what the F-35 can't do. But we're still trying to get the F-35 project to work. And again, this $12 billion is just such a waste of money. This is a plane that just 2 months ago shot itself. Will recently detailed on the show how the operating system Odin, which was a replacement of the Alice operating system, still doesn't work. There's just hundreds and hundreds of problems with this plane. It doesn't fly well in the weather, all these kinds of things that are adding to the amount of money we're spending it. In fact, I think I read that one of the climate change initiatives is to prepare our weapons to operate in worse weather. And I'm not sure that, there's really worse weather caused by climate change, but we do have a lot of our technology that doesn't operate well in inclement weather. And so it could be a way, like, Biden is saying it's for climate change, but it's really just another subsidy for the military industrial complex to be able to work on and solve issues with planes that has nothing to do with climate change and just their failures to be able to fly in inclement weather. But more wasted money for the F-35. 14 Boeing KC-46 tankers are going to cost $2.5 billion. 9 Lockheed Martin CH-53K King Stallion helicopters, 1.7 billion, and then for 30 Boeing Apache attack helicopters, 825 billion. When we're looking at ships, the Pentagon wants $34.6 billion worth. A lot of those ships are going to go to some submarines and an aircraft carrier. So, one General Dynamics Columbia class ballistic missile submarine is going to cost $5 billion. Two General Dynamics Virginia class fast attack submarines for $6.9 billion. One General Dynamics Burke class destroyer for $2.4 million. One frigate FFG Etz for $1.3 billion. One Huntington Ingalls Ford class aircraft carrier for $2.9 billion. And I'm going to stop in and talk about the aircraft carrier a little bit more, because this is another particular weapon system, the Ford class, that has ongoing challenges with the propulsion system to be able to launch the planes, and then also with their elevator system to get the planes from above below deck to load, refuel, do all those things that you would need to do if they're in battle. So these carriers, I don't know if they're really battle ready or how effective they would be in a battle. And there's a lot of really great military experts who have talked about how aircraft carriers are more dated and unnecessary. The Chinese have really advanced surface to ship missiles, so they have these anti-ship missiles all over, and if the U.S. tries to pull some of our ships, aircraft carriers into the region, they're essentially $3 billion floating targets. And not only do they cost $3 billion themselves, they have hundreds of lives on board, as well as, millions and billions of dollars in other aircraft and radar and all that. And so we're talking about a massive sum of money here for these aircraft carriers that aren't really that useful, especially when you're talking about things to defend the American homeland. They're maybe a little bit more useful for power projection. Let's say the United States can't get any of Afghanistan's neighbors to allow us to have an air base in their country to fly missions out to attack Afghanistan. Well, we could part some aircraft carriers in the Indian Ocean and then fly those missions that way. So these are the kind of things that maybe the aircraft carriers would be more helpful for. It's about having a world empire. It's not about defending America or anything like that. And again, this is a weapon system that's not all that effective. It has a lot of serious problems that makes it so. Even if it was in battle and we wanted to fight China with our aircraft carriers, I'm not sure how useful they would be. Another issue with the Ford aircraft carriers is just we have more aircraft carriers than the rest of the countries in the world combined. And so why do we need more? And that even includes when we look at our allied countries like the UK and France, and also count the Russian aircraft carrier that I think it tried to sail from Russia's northern base around Europe into the Mediterranean Sea to support operations in Syria, and it broke down along the way, had a couple fires break out, and so there's a lot of problems and really not a massive need for this, again, unless you want to wage a world empire, have some kind of gunboat diplomacy off of like the coast of the Middle East and Africa in order to enforce our will with airstrikes. The Navy is also looking at increasing its use of unmanned surface vessels, and they want $203 million for that. For vehicles, the Pentagon is requesting $12.3 billion for ground combat systems. This includes 70 M1 Abrams tanks for $1 billion. This was a weapon system that 5-6 years ago the Pentagon was trying to get rid of. They didn't find it useful, and Congress kept making them buy more and more, and so now the Pentagon's looking for more. They're also going to buy 3,800 joint light tactical vehicles for a variety of missions. I'm guessing these are armored vehicles, Humvees, stuff like that, for $1.1 billion, and then 92 amphibious combat vehicles for use across the U.S. Marine Corps for $613 billion. The Pentagon is requesting $10.4 billion for cyber efforts. In this particular CNBC article, they don't actually explain what the Pentagon's going to spend the money for. They just make up a whole bunch of Russiagate and Blue Anon nonsense about how Russia has been behind cyber attacks on the U.S., which they're not really cyber attacks, they're cyber espionage, at least in the case of the SolarWinds attack. The password of the Solar needed for the SolarWinds hack was SolarWinds123. That password was posted online. This isn't an issue that's going to require the Pentagon to spend 10.4 billion. It's an issue that requires, these companies to have better policies and practices. And again, there's no evidence that it is Russia that did it. There also is that, they point out the Colonial Pipeline attack, no evidence that was an outside actor at all. And why, again, this is an issue between that company and the hackers, that it's not the Pentagon that needs to spend billions of dollars to, protect our pipelines in our different countries. This is our companies. This is essentially just a subsidy to like Colonial Pipeline, whoever runs that. So, and now a whole lot of details on what those cyber operations are. I'm looking into more of it, but a lot of the times when I was looking into these, they're all like just projects with code names. It was kind of difficult to drill down, figure out what those projects actually do, how necessary they are. I think some of it is in like for software for tracking systems and stuff like that. The Pentagon wants to spend 20.4 billion to further its layered missile defense system, and so this is going to come like for a variety of different military branches and to different departments. Like the particular, I think, missile defense agency is getting like 9 billion, but there's other branches like the Army that's going to get some of this money as well. They're going to spend 647 billion on sea-based interceptors. They're going to spend 1 billion on the Aegis sea-based system. They're going to spend 1.7 billion on ground-based mid-course and improved homeland defense next generation interceptors. 562 million on the THAAD system and 777 million on the Patriot missile system and enhancing its abilities. In space, we're going to spend 20.6 billion. This is this is a little bit more than the total budget for the Space Force. I think that's 17 something billion. So there's other money going into this. And then these are two things that I haven't been able to completely figure out what they're trying to do with these systems. There's, I think, some classified parts of it, but they're looking for 1.8 billion for a global positioning system enterprise. And then this is the one that was really concerning to me. It's called space-based overhead persistent infrared system for 2.6 billion. And so I'm not sure how much of the planet they're trying to cover with this system, but it sounds like they want consistent overhead and for infrared technology for the maybe the United States. I'm not sure where, but depending on how good this technology is, it could really be very intrusive in allowing the government to look and peek into our lives. They also want to spend 1.7 billion on 5 space launch vehicles and on the rocket system launch program. And it's not necessarily that it's the worst thing if the government was spending money on space exploration, although I'm not for the government spending money on anything, but that's the concerning thing about these particular space vehicles is I think the military is going to use it to start launching radar or weapons into space, and that's going to be the end goal of them. And so this is more steps, 20 billion more dollars towards weaponizing space. And look how expensive the Navy is right now, how much money we're spending on all these ships, or the Air Force, and how much money we're spending on all these aircraft. And they say, well, we now need hypersonic missiles because Russia's S-500 missile interceptor system is going to be able to shoot down our ballistic and some of our cruise missiles. So now we need to spend billions and billions of dollars on hypersonic missiles. The same thing is going to happen with space as the U.S. dumps, tens of billions of dollars into this. Other countries are going to say, well, we at least need to make sure that the U.S. isn't dominant in space. That way they can't put nuclear weapons up there and just say, if you do anything wrong, we're going to, rain hell down on you. or something like that. And so they're going to develop different technologies, and then the U.S. is going to have to spend money. So this Space Force budget and the amount of U.S. money is spending on space as a fighting domain is just going to skyrocket in the future. Another interesting thing is that we're spending a lot of money here on the Eggy system, and apparently that didn't do so well recently. There was a test on a U.S. warship of trying to hit some missiles, and it missed. So we're spending money on these missile defense systems that don't work very well. The Space Force will get a pay raise. They are going to 17.4 billion, a 13% increase over last year. This is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. The Space Force only counts for a very small percentage of the budget, but it was the branch with the biggest increase. The Army took a little bit of a haircut, and a good percentage of this increase is going to go towards adding new members of the Space Force. They call themselves Guardians. How Orwellian is that? But they're going to go to about 8,400 personnel, up from about 6,500 that they currently have. The Army is going to get slightly less money. A lot of those cuts seem to be due to the Iraq and Afghan drawdowns as the U.S., let's say, withdraws ground forces from Afghanistan. It seems like the U.S. is going to continue that war and continue bombing Afghanistan. So they have to ship some more funds over to the Air Force or the Marines or the Navy to be able to carry out those operations. The Army is not going to, I guess, be as involved in that. And so they are taking a little bit of a haircut. In 2021, they got 176 billion. This year, they're going to get 173. So it's not that much money, but it is a little bit. When we look and break down that money, $10.8 billion is for direct war cost, and $8 billion is for enduring cost of war. 65.5 billion is for operation and maintenance, and that's a decrease of 1% over last year. 66.2 billion is for personnel. That's a 1.8% increase, and I believe troops are getting a 2.7%, and civilian personnel are getting a 2.7% bump in pay. And so that's going to be a part of where that money is coming from. Again, that's not the worst thing to spend money on, is giving more money to troops. Although I'm sure it's going to be far more extensive than just, for like the enlisted guys making $20,000-$30,000 a year. It's gonna, the generals are gonna get a big chunk of those pay raises. There is 12.8 billion for research and development, and that's down 1.3 billion from the previous year. And again, the decreases in the Army budget are in part due to drawing down in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, I mentioned the massive amount of money they're going towards the Army's research and development, but overall, this budget is ticking up the research and development, and I think they say tech and engineering they add on to that, but that's going to be $112 billion for research, development, testing, and evaluation. And that's a 5% increase from the 2021 budget. It's the highest number ever. One of the reasons I'm concerned about this money is it seems like it's just being thrown at the military-industrial complex to produce and maybe produce weapons that have a history of not working. And so this seems almost like a giveaway to those companies. So Janes also has a nice breakdown here of the Army budget. Janes does pretty good work on when it comes to looking at budget and weapons, but they do a really interesting job of this particular Army project that's getting funding, and that's the robotic combat vehicle, and they're requesting $84.5 million for this project, and I guess they want a tank that is able to be operated robotically, but the prototypes are already a year or 2 years behind schedule. And so, again, we have a country where there's a massive amount of spending. Biden wants how many billions and trillions of dollars for infrastructure and everything else. They're talking about $50,000 of student debt relief for everyone, and we're still wasting money on projects that are proven to be behind schedule already, and probably aren't going to work out, and it's just more money we're dumping into meaningless projects. So there's another example for that. The Pentagon wants to spend millions of dollars fighting extremism in its own ranks. I think this is 30.8 million for punitive regulation on extremist activities. It's unclear to me exactly what this is and where the money is going. And if it's going to include like screenings as people are going into the military, how much of a role is that supposed to be for the military, especially if it extends beyond just like this guy says he wants to join up, so we're going to do a background check. That's one thing, but if they're starting to pre-screen people, then it could really be we're looking at more military involvement in policing the lives of American civilians. So that's the concerning part to me. The military does have their different kind of like police and MPs and everything like that. So it's not like they don't have ways to monitor and check to make sure people aren't engaging in activity that's dangerous or violent or something like that. And yet they're going to again spend millions of dollars for this new program. I think a little bit of it is just some virtue signaling among the Biden administration to prove that like, hey, we're fighting extremism, when really they're just throwing some money away at the military. They're going to spend $43.2 million to upgrade and finish the Aegis Ashore system in Romania and Poland. The Polish system was supposed to be done years ago, and ongoing construction issues have prevented that. And then they're going to, again, develop the Romanian system. There's going to be $354 million for the Army's precision strike missiles. The code name here is PRSM, so I guess PRISM. 188.5 million will go for research and development, and then 166 million will go for 110 prototype missiles. These missiles were supposed to be accurate at 800 kilometers, and now the Army is just hoping to get 650 kilometers accuracy for them. And then they want 15.7 million to develop land-based anti-ship missiles. The Navy is looking for 268.9 million for unmanned aerial surveillance. They need this because of a shortage of refueling tankers and issues with the F-18. They can't fly the F-18s as often as they need to because there's so much maintenance on the planes, and they can't get the parts and everything like that. And so to make up for the fact that you can't have the manned vehicles in the air flying around the aircraft carrier strike groups, the Navy wants to develop new MQ-25 Stingray drones that they're hoping will be able to do this. And so again, we have all these weapon projects that were supposed to, we spent billions and trillions of dollars on them over all these years, and they were supposed to fill specific capabilities, and now we have to spend hundreds of millions of more on different technology because the first one failed. They also want 375 million for unmanned surface vehicles, 60 million for medium unmanned UAV surveillance vehicles, and 144.8 million for large unmanned surveillance vehicles. The Missile Defense Agency itself will get $9 billion. That's down $1 billion over the past 3 years. And one of the things I noticed as I was reading articles is that anytime a spending program was cut, it was always a significant cut. It was slashed, even if it's it was 10 million in 2019, and now it's 9 billion in 2022. That's not a significant cut, but it's often phrased that way in these articles. And then of course if something goes up and we're spending 10 billion more dollars on something, oh, that spending ticked up over the past year. You know, again, the propaganda is heavy in these articles. 133 million will go towards long range discrimination radar, and this is already years behind schedule. 732.5 billion will go for the Aggie system, and 755 billion will go towards buying the Aggie system, which again I already point out has several failures and isn't as good as shooting down missiles as it's supposed to be. uh, 3 3.8 billion will go towards hypersonics, and that number could increase more. 161 million will go towards the development of the Arrow program, ARRW, and this is a new hypersonic weapon that they're trying to develop. And then let's see. It was interesting. They say they're cutting spending on the modernization programs by 1%. So that's at 245.6 million. I believe the Army took most of this cut. The Army is also looking, the Pentagon in general is also looking to buy less JDAMs in the next year. These are typically weapons that are used in the Middle East, and also Hellfire missiles. So in 2021, the Army bought 16,800 JDAMs. This year they're buying 1,900, and in 2021 they bought 4,500 Hellfires, and this year they're buying 1,700 and 1,176. And I think instead of buying the Hellfires, they're looking at buying missiles that can be used to target the joint air to surface standoff missiles. And these are more concerned with China and Russia and these great power competitions. So they're shifting away from buying those weapons. Now, I think in part this is due to the fact that the U.S. dropped less bombs in 2020 than they had in previous years. And so there's less of a need to catch up and resupply. They're buying tens and tens of thousands of these bombs and missiles in 2017, 2018, as they're waging massive air wars against the Islamic State. We're not dropping 20,000 bombs a year on Raqqa anymore, so there's less of a need for those weapons. But I do think that this is also part of signaling that they're more concerned about China than they are about the Middle East and the shifting U.S. foreign policy, the pivot to Asia. $200 million will go for military family support programs. No details on exactly what that is. There's a slight decrease in the overall troop number. It's like a thousand, a couple thousand. It's not a big deal. And then there is a boost in the amount of military funding going to the Afghan army. Last year that was $3 billion. This year it's $3.3 billion. A couple other notes about the budget that I wanted to make is that just because this is the budget that's been put forward, one of the things that the Pentagon is doing is cutting back on some what they call legacy systems. Some of the older weapon systems, they're starting to decommission and move past them. But this doesn't mean that just because the Pentagon wants to cut it, that Congress is going to agree. There's certain districts or several districts that some of these weapon systems are built in, and so just like there's a nuclear weapons caucus, there's essentially a caucus for all the little weapons programs that go on, missile systems and stuff like that. And so when they try to cut these systems, members of Congress throw an absolute fit because it's going to cost them jobs in their district, or so that's what they believe. And then they do everything possible to keep these systems in the budget. So I found 7 to 10 congressmen who were complaining about specific cuts that the Pentagon wanted to make. So this budget could get bigger. Also, the Republicans will support that because they wanted a larger budget overall. And there are Democrats who are complaining about some of the systems being cut. Now, there's also this interesting article in Defense One by Kevin Barron, and it's titled, "Is the Biden administration proud of its Pentagon budget?" And you would think, well, why would they put forward a budget that they weren't proud of? But it goes through, and I think there's some weak arguments in here, but at the same time, I think it is important and has impacted what the Biden administration is trying to do. And basically, they're saying that the Trump administration did what almost no lame duck president has ever done, and it put forward a 2022 budget proposal for the military. And so I guess the Biden administration felt like it had balance off of that and start off of that when it came to proposing their budget. And then they say that some of the personnel has only been in place like a month here, which again, could be challenges, but at the same time, that isn't an excuse for putting forward a budget that, maybe the Biden administration doesn't believe in or something like that. I don't really think that's the case, but I do think that, maybe that they had more trouble putting together this budget than they thought. And also they're spending an absolute massive amount of money here, $715 billion. And so it's not a great look. And then they also point out that one of the signals that this was a something that the Biden administration wasn't proud of is that this was released on a Friday afternoon. Anybody who watches the news knows that if you want to release something into the news so that it becomes public, but at the same time everybody's not talking about for weeks on end, you release on a Friday afternoon. But on top of that, the administration only gave reporters all of 10 minutes to ask the questions about this budget. And so that's like, $71.5 billion that they spent per minute that reporters were allowed to ask questions on this. And so I do think that they may be right in the article that Biden isn't proud of his defense budget. I just don't think there's any excuse for proposing it. But I do think that the Biden administration is on board with shifting the overall policy into, towards China. They just may not be on board with like spending money on some of the weapon systems, or may want to have sunk more money into hypersonics or something like that. Now, a few updates on Iran and Afghanistan and Iran before I wrap up. In Afghanistan, there's some speculation that the withdrawal may be ahead of schedule. There were some reports saying that we could be out of Afghanistan by mid-July, but then Secretary of Defense Austin said the withdrawal is slightly ahead of schedule. And I wouldn't call mid-July slightly ahead of schedule if the intended withdrawal date was September. This is written up by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. He says that the CENTCOM reports that we're 16 to 25% complete. They're not releasing troop numbers, so this could all be propaganda and just, they put out different things to make it sound good, but then it's not actually going to happen. And I feel like Austin may have thrown some shade on the idea that we're getting out by mid-July by saying that the process is slightly ahead of schedule. Now, in a little bit of good news, it looks like talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government are going to happen in coming days in Qatar. There were supposed to be talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban and other parties in Istanbul over a month ago, and those didn't happen because of the U.S. decision to keep troops in Afghanistan past the May 1st deadline date. But now it looks like the Taliban are looking at least engaging in some talks with the Afghan government. As I said, look, this is a case where a peace deal would be nice, but even if you could have the Afghan government and the Taliban talk about doing some like exchanges of territory now as the U.S. withdraws, that way there's not situations where people are, in Taliban territory when they were informants for the U.S. and Afghan government, and I think would be, likely victims for reprisal attacks. So allowing that, those kinds of things to be worked out now before the U.S. completely withdraws is a positive, although the U.S. shouldn't make its contingent on withdrawing based on a deal being done or something like that. We need to get out, but the Afghan government does have time to make some good decisions and to make this process a little bit safer and less violent. The Taliban have issued a couple warnings in the past 2 weeks Pakistan in particular, but also all neighboring countries to Afghanistan, saying that they should not allow the U.S. to reposition troops in their country. I kind of guess that most of these countries aren't going to want the U.S. enduring presence there. However, there is Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan that the U.S. could put pressure on. I'm guessing that China isn't going to allow it. I don't think Iran is going to allow it. And so I think if the U.S. is going to look to provide long-term air support to the Afghan government, or look to be able to carry out, just our own strikes in Afghanistan, whether we claim that there's some Al-Qaeda guy somewhere or whatever else, that may have to come from assets positioned either in the Middle East, Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, or on some aircraft carriers that we like sit off the coast of Pakistan, the Indian Ocean. I'm sure the U.S. will continue to have like a military relationship with Pakistan going forward, and so there may be some operations that the U.S. could carry out from Pakistan, but I don't know if Pakistan is looking to let the U.S. have a massive presence on their soil again that is repurposed and just looking to carry out the war in Afghanistan from the neighboring country. As the U.S. withdraws, it has been transferring bases over to the Afghan government, and a major one that was just transferred was the new Kabul compound. That's obviously in Kabul, and there was a ceremony where General of U.S. Forces Scott Miller transferred it over to the Afghan government Ministry of Defense. This one's in Kabul. I don't know if it'll exactly fall or anything like that, but it is worth noting that has now been officially transferred over. I don't know if the American presence is completely out of that base, though. Losses are piling up for the Afghan army. Jason Ditz writes that in in the month of May, 26 outposts and bases in 4 different provinces have fallen, and so there are losses mounting for the Afghan government, and I suspect this will continue to happen as the U.S. withdraws from the country. Now, the interesting thing is this happened as the U.S. was withdrawing, but also after we blew past the May withdrawal date, and so it could be that the Taliban are ramping up an offensive now to try to really push the U.S. and demand they leave, and maybe the attacks could or would slow down after the U.S. withdrawal is completely done. But right now, it looks like the Taliban are picking up some major gains against the Afghan government. There's a question about the air support and what it would look like after the U.S. troops and contractors withdrawal, assuming that happens. The Afghan defense minister suggested that foreign air support may continue. And so, again, I think there's 2 different kinds of operations that you could look at. The U.S. could carry out operations against like terrorist threats, or even against the Taliban for its own purposes. We see a Taliban cell here that whatever, they can make that argument. Or they could carry out air support when asked by the Afghan government or the Afghan army, which I think would be a lot more prevalent and a lot more problematic. And I don't see how it would really fall under like the 2001 authorization for use of military force if the U.S. has, ostensibly, ended our presence in Afghanistan, how we're still going to continue to support the Afghan army with airstrikes. But I am concerned that that's the direction that the U.S. is going to end up moving, and it's possibly the only thing that could allow the Afghan government to extend the amount of time it could keep the Taliban from taking back major territory. And so it could be a political decision on behalf of Joe Biden looking at the situation in the United States and say, well, I rather carry out these attacks in support of the Afghan government around like Lashkar and Kandahar city to try and prevent these cities from falling to the Taliban, rather than letting the Republicans like Liz Cheney or even Democrats like Jeanne Shaheen from making the point that we're allowing the country to fall and that he has to go back or something like that, or being a political loss in the U.S. It looks like it was a mistaken policy to end the war. I could really see the U.S. Actually doing this. Now, another issue that the Afghan army is going to have is with their helicopters. So, their helicopter fleet is bought for them by the U.S., but the Russians, their Mi-17s, and they were bought from 2011 to 2013. But then in 2014, the U.S. attempted a coup in Ukraine, and it didn't go so well, and Crimea ended up being annexed by Russia, and so the U.S. then sanctioned Russia. And so since 2014, the U.S. has relied on India to purchase the Russian-made helicopter parts for the Afghan government. I swear that this is a real story. I'm not making this up. I know it sounds unbelievably stupid that would be what the U.S. Army is doing in Afghanistan, but that is the case. And so now the Afghan government is looking for some kind of direct ties or support from the Russian government to beef up these helicopters. I'm not sure that the Russians would be completely unwilling to sell the Afghan government helicopter parts, but at the same time, I'm not sure how they feel like this government is long term anyways, so why support them and alienate the Taliban is also a possible issue. Or I think India is probably going to be a country interested in keeping the Kabul government at least in power somewhat in Kabul, and so they may continue to supply the Afghan government with these parts and just do these backdoor deals. But it's funny that the U.S. is threatening to sanction India over buying the S-400 potentially missile air defense system from Russia, and yet we encourage and ask India to buy these other military components from Russia. Of course, that's because we have sanctions on Russia and we want to pretend like we care about those. All right, so on Iran talks, Iran has now said that issues remain in trying to resolve the last issues between the U.S. and Iran over the JCPOA. We heard a week or so ago the Iranians sounding very optimistic, and the Russians saying that potentially this fifth round of talks could get a deal done. This statement to me makes it seem like that's pretty unlikely that we're going to see a deal done this time around. It's not impossible that talks don't get worked out, but it does look like there's more hiccups than the Iranians were saying a week or so ago. The U.S. has pirated some Iranian oil. Yep. We took in our ship holding 2 million barrels of Iranian crude oil off the coast of the UAE, sailed it to the U.S., and then sold it to, I believe, an American company for $110 million. And so these are the kind of activities that the U.S. Navy is engaged in. And what we do when we have this massive Navy and all these billions of dollars that we're spending is it allows us to say that Iran, you know what, you actually can't have a relationship with Venezuela. The Venezuela people need fuel, they're poor, they're starving, and Iran wants to, sell them, different fuel or petrochemicals to make fuel, but the U.S. is saying that we can't allow that. And Iran recently had I think a warship and a tanker somewhere off the coast of Africa. And just on the speculation that may be headed to Venezuela, the U.S. warned Iran against sailing that ship. And I guess, the threat is that if you do, we're going to come and steal the oil and sell it to one of our own companies again. And, that's what this massive military is for. It's not about keeping Americans safe. It's about being able to control the entire world, to tell the Iranians that they can't do business with the Iraqis or the Venezuelans, to tell the Afghan or the world that they can't do business with the Russians. That includes the Afghan government. And so we had to facilitate these back door things with India. But this is about world domination. This is about empire, and it's costing us hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars a year. And we really need to put an end to it. But this budget we have from Biden just pushes it forward. All right, that's what I have on today's show. Be sure to share the show. You can find YouTube and Odyssey. Again, really recommend Odyssey over YouTube at this point, just because we got censored by YouTube, and I'm worried it's going to happen again. I've seen a lot of cases where it seems like once people start getting flagged, it just goes on and on and on. And so who knows? I got like some jerk mass reporting my show, and they're just going to find everything they can in every episode flag it, and then eventually the channel will be gone. But if that happens, you'll always be able to find the show at Odyssey or the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for all my work. Donate to the show, help us keep going around here. Patreon, Subscribe Star, addresses to crypto wallets are in the show notes page. You find the show at antiwar.com on the blog section. And thanks y'all for listening. I'll be back with another show on Friday.